Dr. Karen Rayne has worked in education for the past 2 decades, although she doesn't like it. You look very young to me. With a speciality in sexuality education. She's a founder and executive director of Unhushed, where she writes and edits books and comprehensive curricula around sexuality, transsexuality, and building coalitions. And you are also the assistant professor at the institution at the University of Texas. And you've written lots of books to do with love, sex, romance, sexuality. How does a mum broach a conversation with girls or boys, doesn't really matter whether she's got a girl or boy, from a non-biological, standpoint? Because I think they do biology very well, but just so more of the relationshipy, more of the that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Like, I think it's important to bring in our non-binary kids also, so we can just say, how does a parent broach a question to a child, right? Or broach a conversation with a child. And in some ways it depends on how old the kid is, and acknowledging that kids need different things. But I really think that starting the conversation with yourself is actually the first thing. So kind of getting yourself ready as a parent to have that conversation is really the first place to start. So if this is a new conversation for you, if this is a new topic, if you're like, I have not really talked with my kids about sex, and now I have teenagers and I'm ready to start talking, I know that I need to start talking, what do I do? The first thing is to really get ready yourself and to think through all of your own experiences and preconceptions about what adolescent sexuality is, and to kind of work on not bringing those things into your conversation with your teenager. And then kind of after you've thought through your own issues, the next step is really to then just open spaces. So, you ask a question, but just ask one question. Don't ask a whole bunch of questions. If your kid is listening to music and you're there, talk about the lyrics. Ask them if they've listened to the lyrics. Ask them what they mean. Talk about the things that are happening. If they're watching a movie, maybe not during the movie because that can ruin the experience, but later you can be like, hey, in that movie, this thing, there are always things happening in the news media and the press, and our illustrious global leaders are often offering us opportunities to talk about sex and sexuality in really specific ways. So use those opportunities to start a conversation. But remember that as a parent of a teenager, you've already done a lot of teaching. Whether or not you were intending to, whether or not it was like a thoughtful process, you have done a lot of teaching. And most teenagers are pretty good at guessing what their parents are going to say about things. So when you bring up those topics, your goal is not to actually have a conversation, but to listen to what your teenager says and to really get to know them. They've done a lot of work in getting to know you, and you don't change as quickly as they do. Teenagers are in this, this point of massive development, identity development, cognitive development, their social development. So much is happening during these adolescent years, and getting to know your kid over and over and over again at every stage of their development during the adolescent years is critical. And it's ultimately going to set the two of you up for a lifetime of dialogue, which is what we're looking for, right? It's not actually about the right now. It's actually about creating that relationship that's going to be then powerful for the next 50 years.
Cool. So I'm just making notes, sorry. So one of the questions is, so they know that school teaches about sex ed, but when it comes to their individual child, is there an age which is too young? If they're not there yet, should they still have a conversation around it?
Yeah, I think this question of like, not there yet, and there's big air quotes around not
Mm.
there yet, is a really interesting one, right? Like, what does that fully mean? Because really, we want our kids to have information before they're there, right? We want our
That's very
kids to
true.
have information before they need it. If we're like, okay, we're going to try and like, on the day you need to know about condoms, we're going to introduce you to condoms. You're really too late,
Yeah.
right? Like, and you're not going to be there. Like in that moment when they're suddenly like, okay, I'm ready to have sex, you're not going to be there to be like, wait, let's talk about condoms. So we have to talk with kids before they're quote unquote there. And there's all these other benefits to them learning about things, right? Because their friends are going to be talking about them. Their friends might need the information, right? Knowing about sex is not about applying the information in an immediate way to their sex lives. It's really about being a literate human. And so we're looking to create spaces for young people to become literate in human sexuality, and doing that through the home environment is great. And yes, they do get it in school. There's a variety, there's a range of quality of their experiences though. Like, let's just acknowledge, even in schools where some education is assumed and included, there's not anywhere in the world a really good program that trains all sex ed teachers to be really good sex ed teachers. There's just not. There's lots of programs, and some teachers have gone through them and some teachers haven't. And you don't necessarily know what the training for your kid's teacher is. So you have to keep your eyes on this ball, and even if your kid has a really good teacher, there's room for you as the parent at home, because your kid's teacher is not going to have their eyes on your kid the way you do. So you can bring so much into that environment, into that conversation. And you're going to need to be talking about your family's values. That's one of the big roles of the family, is to talk about values and to talk about, what does it mean in your family? What is the role of sexuality in your family? And talking with your kids about that when they're young and having that be a part of the conversation is really important. And then when they become teenagers, and I'm going to hammer this home, your goal is to stop talking and to start listening, and to listen to what they think their values are without interjecting your own. They know yours. They know yours. So you have to really work to shift and become a listener.
Okay, so say they've shifted and become a listener, and now the young person is telling them things that aren't quite true. So, there's a lot of myths out there that the young people tell each other, and they'll think, oh, that's what it is, or how you do it, or how you prevent it from getting pregnant, for example. And so how do you gently explore that with them so they find out what the truth is?
Yeah. So it depends on how your kid is bringing it to you, right? Is your kid coming to you and saying like, I think that pregnancy starts this way, but I'm not sure. Okay. Right. That's a great time to answer the question.
That's an easy time to answer the question.
Easy time to answer the question, right? If your kid is, on the other hand, being like, so-and-so got pregnant by doing this, that's a much harder time to interject, right? And it's not necessarily the right time, because what they're doing is sharing. They're sharing parts of their life, and that's not the time to interrupt them with factoids. Yes, knowing how pregnancy starts is absolutely critical. We all need to have a really good handle on that. That's something to come back to in a different conversation. Put a mental pin in that and be like, okay, we need to talk about how pregnancy happens. So yes, there will be another time, another conversation. And this is another benefit, right? The fact that parents can have conversations over and over and over again. If a kid in my classroom is sharing something like that, I have to stop them in that moment. And we cannot get to that like connecting piece, because I can't have all these other kids hearing misinformation. And I'm not going to have another chance at a conversation with all of them quickly enough. So we have to stop. know, but as a parent, you can listen to that and come back even a few hours later or the next day and be like, hey, in our conversation yesterday, you had some misinformation, and I want to be sure to correct that.
Mm. Mm. So what about the misinformation about condoms and helping boys to realize that it's okay to wear condoms, and that because a lot of boys say, oh, well, you lose feeling. And back in the day, 100 years ago, you know, when they used to wash them up and hang them on the line, that was probably very much true. But today's technology, but they still have that old way of thinking is still there. Oh, I don't feel it, I don't get any pleasure. But you have to, especially if you're a girl, you have to, you know, they give away their powers sometimes because they want to please the boy. So, or the, you know, whatever gender, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think all young people, regardless of what genitals they have, need some hands-on experience with condoms. So the way to debunk myths about condoms is to go buy yourself a bunch of condoms and have like a science day with them at home. So you just have a bunch of condoms on the table. You have a couple different kinds of lube, get water-based and oil-based to show the ways that oil-based lube degrades condoms. As a family, you open those suckers up, you put them on your hand, you see what you can feel through them, you add some lubricant. You know, the way that condoms feel good and the way that they can actually increase pleasure is if you put a drop or two of lube on the inside and a drop or two of lube on the outside. And that helps immeasurably. So do those things with your kids. You know, I love doing those things in middle school. Middle schoolers are they think it's hilarious. By and large, they have not started having sex yet. And I'm sorry, so this is like maybe 13 to 15-year-olds ish.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, this is a great age because mostly they're not having sex, but they're like aware that sex might be in their future. Right. And so it's a great time to lay some really specific groundwork. It's also just fun and hilarious. See how big you can get the condoms, you know, like if there's different flavored condoms, lick them and see what they taste like. Mostly they're very gross, you know, but just have fun. Have it be a moment of hilarity, and it debunks so many myths around condoms and will make sure that your kids feel comfortable talking to you about condoms.
So I love that, and I absolutely am with you. But there are parents out there, quite a lot of parents, who would not feel comfortable in that situation and wouldn't know how to do that together. As they need to do it themselves and have a conversation with themselves. Then they need to have a conversation with their partner, and then they need to. There's a lot of different steps before you can do that. And I think that would be, if my mum had done that with my mum and dad had done that with me, oh, it would have been amazing. I would have remembered that for my life.
Yeah, it's a great moment.
it is, and it's just breaks down so many barriers and so many. If you can do that, your kids will just know they can talk to you about anything.
So yes, if you cannot do it, and there are some parents who cannot, find someone else who can. Right? This is the role of the auntie or, you know, the family friend. Be like, I need you to take my kid, and I need y'all to go buy condoms and play with them, you know, get to know them, open them up, see how they look, see how big you can get them, you know, put them over your hand with some lubricant, see what you can feel through them, you know, like, you can outsource that to a family friend. But if your goal is to make sure that your kid has an adult in their life who they feel comfortable talking about sex with, this is the way to do it.
That's right, because you don't have to be there for every single conversation they're ever going to have. As long as they have somebody safe who you trust, will tell them. And on it. I love it. That's the most modern way of doing that I have ever heard. So yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how I roll, Esther. Like, if you want things that are like definitely on the cutting edge of thought around sex education, that's what I bring.
Yeah, because I know that they do condoms and stuff in school, but it's always on like A demonstrator.
Yeah,
And
it's about how to put it on, which is super useful and very important. It's very practical, but it's not actually what most kids have questions about, right? Most of them have questions about like, what does it feel like? So in the classes that I run, when I do a condom demonstration, it comes with all these other things. So we do a demonstration on a model. I also have them practice on a model. But then we also have all these other things happening. So they're like opening them up and like playing with them. And I actually take kids and make them buy the condoms first. And then we bring them back to the classroom. So I have like, 13, 14, 15-year-olds going into the pharmacy and buying the condoms. And then we go, and they each have to buy their own box. Like they all have they walk out of the store with their individual box of condoms. And those are the ones that we then open up, because it also lets them
really empowering.
It's super empowering. It really lets them like feel like they can access healthcare. Yes. They can access sexual healthcare, and we give them, before we go, we have an extensive conversation about like what to do if you feel uncomfortable, what to do if somebody challenges you, and we've had kids go through I've been taking kids to buy condoms for like 15 years now. And so I've done it with lots and lots of kids, lots and lots of hilarity. A few people ran into some problems, but we've given them the tools beforehand. We talk about what happens if you see someone in the pharmacy. What do you do? What are your options? And we talk about how, they can put the box of condoms down and leave the store. Like they can, and then go back in later, like, or they can talk to the person, and I say, and as your first experience in buying condoms, you have someone outside the store to go to for help. Like I am right outside that door. And so if anything happens where you don't feel like you can handle it, you just put your things down and walk away, and you come and get me. I've never had anyone do that, but but they have used I think that helps them go in, right? It gives them the confidence to actually go into the store.
Yeah. And once you've done it once, so to speak, it's when you really, really do need to do it, it's not a big deal.
Right. You're like, oh, I know how to do that. Yeah.
So if a parent has asked somebody else in the family to do that bit with them, and how do they then make sure that their young person, their child, can come and talk to them if they do have an accident, or they do think they've got an infection, or there's something that they need, something of that nature that they need, advice, or they need to go and do something about?
Yeah. So I think it might just be that you tell the parent can tell the child, among other things, I'm not great at talking about sex stuff.
Be honest. Yeah.
Right? Like it makes me uncomfortable. I want to help you. I don't know how, that's why I had like Auntie Maureen have that condom conversation with you. So I just want you to know, like, I'm a bit awkward about it, but you can still come and talk to me. And you can also always talk to Auntie Maureen. There's not a lot of times where something is so suddenly necessary around sexual health care, with the exception of something like a miscarriage. But most things, like it's not suddenly urgent. Like, like, oh, I have a growing realization that I need to go to the doctor. Or, either to get, maybe a pregnancy test, or to get an STI check, or I have a growing realization that my relationship is not stable and I need help in figuring that out, right? Like these are the things that happen. It's not a sudden and urgent need. So kids have time, and they have time to find the person who they want to talk to.
Okay.
They just need to be sure that there is someone. If we're talking about something like starting a first period, that's something that's suddenly very urgent, right? Like, oh, I have never had a period before. Now I have one. I urgently need supplies. So making sure that either supplies are just always kept around, or making sure that everybody who lives with the child, is comfortable talking about it. Like talk about it as a family and say, hey, your 10 or 11, however old you are, you know, everyone here knows that you're going to be starting your period in the next, 6 months or year or 2 years or however long it is. And we're all comfortable supporting you with that.
Yeah, definitely. So when you talked about they know the family's values and they know what you're going to say before you say it, how do you help them to feel, that sex is something so valuable and so special that it's, because sometimes they will listen to music and it doesn't sound like it's such a big gift. So how do you help them to realize how it's something, it is amazing and it is lovely and you can, entitled to whatever, but it's a so special gift to give to somebody else who should deserve it. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah. So I think that some parents would agree with you about that and some would disagree. Okay. Right. So part of that first step is figuring out your own values. What are your values around sex? And then what you're asking, I think, is how do you communicate those values?
Yes, that's it. Yes.
Once you have determined what your values are and you have done that, by the time your children are teenagers, you have communicated your value system around sex. And if anything, your kids will err on the side of thinking you are more conservative than you are. That's just how it is. I know so many parents, I know so many teenagers, I've talked with all of them. I can guarantee you, your children do not think that you have a more liberal perspective on sex than you do. Okay. So again, it's your physical presence in a conversation about sex where it's mostly you listening. Just your literal physical presence is sufficient to remind your children of your values. You need to be prepared to listen to them talk about their values.
And that takes a weight off, because some of them, and mums and dads, are worried about sitting down and having that conversation, when in fact what you're saying is that their kids already know. That it's like they've had that conversation whilst they've been growing up without actually speaking the words. So you can start at a different place, at a better place.
Yeah. So what you need to do is something like, when do you think is the right time for a couple to start having sex? And then just listen and be comfortable with silence. Being able to just ask that question and then sit in silence until your child breaks the silence is an exceptionally difficult thing to do, and is ultimately like your kid is going to feel the yawning emptiness of that silence and is going to want to fill it. And you just have to be prepared for them to get more uncomfortable than you are in that space with that kind of a question, and ask it in a good time, right? Like, don't ask it like weirdly over Thanksgiving dinner or anything, like we're wanting a time here where it's going to be comfortable for everybody. So, like while you're cooking dinner together one night, ask that question, but be ready to sit in silence for minutes at a time while you let them collect their thoughts and prepare to answer the question.
And when you're watching TV together, there's so many issues that come up, aren't there? You could just like pause it, and depending on who else is in the room, you could just say, what do you think? It's just
possibly, although again, that can really interrupt the flow and their enjoyment of the moment.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's something to like bring up after the show is over. Like as the credits are rolling, be like, pause that and be like, what'd you think? Again, the question is about an opening of a space for them to share their thoughts, not for you to be like, man, he was an asshole, wasn't he? Like that's not inviting them into a space where their thoughts and their reactions are being prioritized. They know you think he was an asshole. If you think that, they know it. They already know.
Yeah. I love that they just of course they've lived with you, but you forget that they have been watching you throughout, and they have been listening throughout and picking it up.
For more than a decade. They've been observing you for more than a decade. You know, we know that like toddlers are so imitative, right? Like that's what they do, is they imitate the things that they see. So your children, if they have lived with you for their entire lives, they started off their life imitating you.
Yeah.
That was their entire goal as little tiny beings. And now they're trying to differentiate themselves from you. As teenagers, that's so much of their goal. And so you need to give them space to do it because it's developmentally appropriate and necessary.
So I have one last question, and it's about the heart. So it's about how to help. I think it's actually a personal thing. It's as a mum, how do you manage your own feelings when your daughter gets a heart broken and, you know, it hasn't been treated well? And you go into that vengeful kind of like mama bear kind of thing. But
yeah. So a couple of things. It is okay for your kid to see you being angry on their behalf.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Like but you cannot center your feelings. So you just get a little tiny drop of feelings compared to their whole ocean, right? But it's okay to be like, whoa, man, you let me know if you need me to call it a hit on him. Like be in your own way, right? Like that's my way. That's what my way to show my children of like, someone has done you wrong and I'm angry with them. But you get to say it once, and then all of your other feelings have to be processed elsewhere. So you get yourself a therapist, you get yourself you go buy a bunch of, really cheap glassware at the secondhand store and you just smash it. But you take care of that on your own time. Although smashing with your kids can also be fun.
Okay. Yeah, because I think what my experience of this particular mum was that, you know, when you as a teenager didn't process your feelings, when you see it happen to your child, it just feels like it's you all over again. And I think you're right. They need to go and get some other kind of outside help.
They do, for sure. This is how it works throughout your children's lives, right? Every time your child is going through a stage, you revisit the things that you experienced at that age. And, even if your child is like, maybe your child is even just like a little sad about the breakup, but you experienced a really traumatic breakup in adolescence. And so you're feeling your own, like very much bigger emotions than your child is necessarily even feeling, right? It's easy to re-trigger those things. You have to get help. You have to get emotional support. If there are things
that is one of the biggest emotional impacts, isn't it? Having your heart broken for the first time, it's just like everybody remembers that. And really nobody helps you manage that very well, process it very well. And it could take years, can't it? So
yeah, one of the things that we talk about in my curriculum is heartbreak. So, a really good sex ed curriculum is going to talk about heartbreak and grief and sadness over losing a relationship and over being rejected by someone. A really good comprehensive sex ed curriculum includes talking about how do you ask someone out on a date and how do you break up with someone using all of our assertive communication tools that we know we need to have, but how do we use those in the context of telling someone that you don't want to be in a relationship with them any longer? It's a hard question, and it's part of a good sex ed curriculum.
And it's one that doesn't often get role modeled very. A lot of adults don't know how to do that, how to take full responsibility, and
yeah, and then our media representations of it are really all bad. Awful, like so bad. We don't want any of those, right? And so, yeah, we don't have a lot of good modeling. We don't have a lot of good experience. It's a substantial problem.
So our time is up because I've got the next one in 5 minutes. So thank you. I really appreciate Karen, and I love. I'm going to share your little image. What's your multicolored image? I can't. Every time you send me an email.
Oh yes. So I have a book called Breaking the Hush Factor.
That's it. Yes.
10 rules for talking with teenagers about sex. And I think that you have the little graphic of those 10 rules, but a more like complete discussion of them is in my book, Breaking the Hush Factor. And you can find it just at hushfactor.com.
Brilliant. So I'm going to put all the links are coming when with the recording and everything. And yeah, thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I'll catch up with you another time. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.